it is today, but it is not the earliest or the only source. And this is what is linked to the sensitivity about the Aryan migration. Because we think it is the Arya-Vedic Sanskrit culture is the source of the Indian civilization. That's when you hear that there is Arya migration, then you feel that it's as if the whole of the Indian culture has been imported. But that's not true. What we have created is a mixture of different histories, different migrations that has happened over time. And the second assumption is that if you say there was an Arya migration, then it means that the Vedas, the Sanskrit, all of those were imported in some form and then unpacked and used. That's not true. Sanskrit is a result of the interaction of new migrants with the people who are already existing here. The Vedas were created as a part of the mixing and intermingling between different people who were in India. So Aryan migration doesn't challenge either the uniqueness of the culture that we have created or whatever else that we have created. To give an example, the earliest version of the Sanskrit we know, the Rig-Vedic Sanskrit, for example, has retroflex consonants like ta, da, na, da. These are words, these are consonants where you have to twirl your tongue and strike your palate. And retroflex consonants are not there in any other Indo-European language. Not even in Persian, which is so close, which is like, you can read Avastha. If you can read Rig Veda, you can read Avastha. That's the kind of closeness that is between Persian, and even Persian doesn't have it. So with maybe one or two very marginal exceptions, no Indo-European language has retroflex consonants. So how did Sanskrit get it? So because retroflex consonants are a regular feature of pre-Aryan languages already in India, including Dravidian. So it's a clear instance of influence of pre-Aryan languages on Sanskrit in the earliest level of Sanskrit that we know, with the arrival of migrations from Central Asia. So the similar is the case with the scriptures. They all see, for example, the earliest scriptures do not mention yoga, but in later scriptures you can see mention of it. So it's at multiple levels what we see is a mixing of cultures that have come from different parts. So what we have created is a unique civilization, and this is what has happened over, this kind of mixing is what has happened in other parts of the world either. This is nothing new. What we know today is that the caste system, we often think it was inevitable. What we now know today is that it was not inevitable. That's not the way that we were going until we came to 100 CE, when we stopped and decided to set the clock back. Because it is counterintuitive, right? It's easy to imagine two groups of people who were not mixing suddenly deciding one day, hey, this makes no sense, let's start mixing. It's much more difficult to imagine two different people who were mixing freely one day waking up and saying, no, we need to put a stop to this. So we need to see that as a political development that happened that set the clock back, and what politics can make, what politics can unmake too. So there's nothing inevitable about it. So these are the broad lessons that one can take, and so that's where it ends.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. What Mr. Tony Joseph has tried to take us through his understanding of what is the latest research. But there are other points of view. Now I've been going through, and there are people who criticize him no end and say he is one kind of total outcast type who has come up to throw something else. And there are a lot of other, because he's talking about something about more than 65,000 years ago. There are many views. But anyway, he has tried to tell us something And I am sure we'll have questions from Mr. Joseph has agreed to take as many questions as possible. We can throw we'll start from one end. First we'll, Mike could.
When the modern man arrived in India, where there were already the different species of Homo habilis, erectus, Neanderthalensis, and all that.
Yeah.
So what happened to them? But didn't the modern man evolve from these species? If you say that these people disappeared, why did they disappear?
No, we might share a common ancestor sometime earlier, but it's not that we descended from them. But we did. Our ancestors, as in modern humans, in some cases did intermingle with them, leaving us with a little bit of ancestry. Like I said, we all carry a little bit 2% of the ancestry of the Neanderthals. Does that make Neanderthals our ancestors? In some sense, yes, because we do carry 2% of their ancestry too. But it is probably more accurate to see them as evolutionary cousins with whom our modern human ancestors did dally at some point of time in the past. So to answer your question, no, they are not our direct ancestors. What happened to them? They disappeared all over the world. We know that the Homo Neanderthals disappeared in Europe around 40,000 years ago. When exactly Homo erectus disappeared is still not clear, but it is possible that they disappeared long ago. Multiple reasons in each case. In some cases, it might have been modern humans who drove them to extinction. As at some point of time, they upgraded their technology, and we have not have a full understanding of it. But yes, over a period of time, all of the Homo species disappeared, leaving us as the only member of the Homo species that is still existing.
Mr. Shivakumar.
Very informative presentation. My only question is this, a very small point that you have mentioned, not on the big point. You mentioned that there was a huge male-dominated migration from the western part of, that is East Asia and also Central Asia to the place we are talking about, the Harappan civilization area and things like that.
No, East Asian did not go to the...
No, but from this side, I would say that, this is a wild thing to say. Large-scale migration dominated by male will normally occur in a peaceful manner, not where there is violent... it happens where only the males are moving because of warfare, because of aggression. Would that be a reasonable assumption to make? If that is a reasonable assumption to make, then can we say then that all this movement was an aggressive move instead of a peaceful movement of people?
We cannot make...
Just a wild guess.
I understand. That happened, and that result can be arrived because of multiple things. It need not be because all the migration was male. The migration may have been both males and females, but the males may have had more success in leaving a progeny behind because they had more success in mating with others in the new population that they arrived. So it need not be that the original population that came was male dominated. It could be the relative success of the people who came. Now, as far as whether this could have been violent, not violent, until we have archaeological evidence, it would be incorrect to use the word invasions. It's the same thing in Europe as well. There are people who say these migrations from Central Asia were violent and they destroyed what was a matriarchal or society. But there are others who said no. This is something that happened over a long period of time as groups moved in. So it is wrong to see it as violent. So as I said, we don't have... Genetics cannot solve that answer, and we do not have evidence from archaeology to suggest it.
But genetics does tell us that the male population movement was more.
Yes. As I said, male population success rate of leaving a progeny behind was more. They might have come with both.
How did that happen? Did it happen because males were or did it happen? I mean,
I do not think we have enough evidence to. We should wait. As I said, this is also a difference of opinion that has happened in the European context also, and the best opinion that I can find from scientists on the field is that the most parsimonious stance to take is that we know that there was migration, and that we cannot. Other things are all speculation. I'm sure I don't satisfy your answer, but I'm saying.
What I'm trying to say is that if the male population was moving much more than the female population, why did it happen?
In the European context, yeah.
We'll take from Mrs. Achala Malik and Mr. Balasubramaniam.
I must.
It's on, ma'am.
I must congratulate you, Mr. Joseph. It's a fascinating
Thank you.
presentation which you've given, and I'm particularly grateful to you that your presentation has more or less demolished the very iniquitous theory of the Aryan invasion theory, which has plagued Indian history and cultural historians and archaeologists. And as Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, we had to meet people on both sides, lefts and rights, who used to discuss this, which was really a fairly modern theory. This Aryan invasion theory was propounded by somebody who is held in great veneration, that is Max Muller, who propounded this theory at the behest of Queen Victoria's husband in order to downgrade Indian civilization, and said it came from outside. So this was the part which I liked best, and that what we have known much earlier, people like historians like Ramesh Chandra Dattu, who have said that this has been a long waves of migration without violence and with great demographic, cultural, linguistic mixture. So thank you for writing this book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had the good fortune to read your book about 3 months back, and it's an admirable book. I have 2 questions. To avoid rambling, I have put it in writing, and I'll just read it in about 60 seconds. Kindly bear with me. One is general, the other one is specific to Harappan civilization and in India. The first is general. The accepted out of Africa hypothesis says Homo sapiens from Africa migrated and multiplied in the rest of the world, including India. But the Africans have certain distinct features such as large head, protruding mouth, etc., etc. But the Mongoloids and the Caucasians do not have these. How do we reconcile these differences with the out of Africa hypothesis if they were the first and the only migration, the first migration to start and occupy the whole world? Does mutation and selection fully explain it? The second one is specific to India. The book establishes that Harappan civilization is pre-Rig Vedic. According to Patanjali's Mahabhashya, which is also quoted in your book, Aryavarta is the land north of Vindhyas and east of the confluence of Yamuna and Ganga. And beyond this limit is the Mlecha Desa. This is exactly what is written there. The people south of Vindhyas were Dravidians. Since Rig Veda is post-early Harappan, does the Rig Veda say Dravidians were barbarians? I mean, it's a very controversial thing, but this is what is mentioned. The other point is, subsequent to this is, Harappans themselves are said to be from the mingling of ancestral North Indians, ANI, and ancestral South Indians, ASI.
No.
Is it not?
Can I answer? I will get lost. So let me answer the second question first.
I'll just finish this ASI thing.
Okay.
There are ancestral South Indians. Were these ancestral South Indians, were they from Africa 65,000 years ago, and they were the first Indians, whether they were the first Indians or whether the progeny of the native archaic people which you mentioned, such as the Atrampakam people who lived much before the Harappan times and all that. That's what I just want to know, the clarification regarding ASI. archaic, ancestral South Indians.
Okay, so I'll start with the last question first.
What is this?
An ancestry that we know of. They went extinct. They don't have. Harappans are not a mixture of NI and ASI. They are a mixture of first Indians, which in the nomenclature that you have used from first Indians can be used as AASI, which is ancestral ancient South Indian. So it's so to use the same phraseology, Harappans would be AASI plus West Asians. And ancestral North Indian already includes the Arya migration, the Central Asian migration. So that's the next stage. So, but your earlier question about the Dravidians and the etc. I mean, this I should have. In fact, this is I don't know how I missed it. It's a consistent mistake that we make to consider the Arya as one monolithic group of people who had similar approaches and who had similar attitudes. This is wrong, because we know from the ancient texts themselves that there were conflicts between multiple groups, right? And I think it is more realistic to consider that, like most people, that there were multiple groups with very different ideologies, outlook on life. And you can already see it, for example, in the linguistically. The Grierson, who was the Grierson hypothesis, he is the fellow who wrote the first linguistic survey of India. He maps Indo-European languages into two groups, the North Central and South Western and Eastern, and which is very interesting. The North Central would include Hindi, Punjabi, Rajasthani, all of those things. Southwest Central, Southwestern and Eastern would include Oriya, Bengali, Marathi, etc. So it's so the central North Indian is in the land between Ganga, Yamuna, that part, and the other part is outside of it. So one way of looking at it, these two languages group together because they say that the differences are like that. These are the sub-families. It's possible to look at it as the result of two separate groups of migrations, one which came through Punjab and straight into the Ganga Yamuna region. The other one went through Sindh, Gujarat, came down towards the Deccan and then moved east and then into Orissa, Bengal, all of those things. But the thing is that both these regions were populated by people who spoke Indo-Aryans and called themselves Arya. Both people in both regions, in both languages. But in the mind of the people in the first part, the people in the other part are not Arya. So that's why Patanjali says, he asked the question, which is the land of the Aryas? And he himself answers it by saying, the Aryavarta, as before the confluence of Ganga and Yamuna, it's between the Himalayas and the Vindhyas. That's the land of the Arya. Outside of that is Mlecha Desha. Now we know that outside of that is actually people who consider themselves Arya. So why does one part of Arya consider the other part not Arya? So one would think that this is because of differences. This is why we should not look at all of Arya migrations as one monolithic group. And there are differences in approach, in how society ought to be organized, on how language should be used, and it's tempting to consider that the outer languages, whom the Aryavarta considers Mlecha Desha, that they were more liberal, to use a modern term, in terms of both mixing and in terms of using language, and that was not acceptable to the people of Aryavarta. The interesting thing is that it is in the Mlecha Desha that we first see the second urbanization happening, right? The rising of the cities after the disappearance of the Arya. It's where the new religions come from, the Jainism, Buddhism. It's where the first empire rises, Maurya. So that's where there is a lot of activity, there's a lot of development. So it is tempting to consider that there was a conflict between these two ways of organizing how society ought to be organized, how we should deal with other groups or communities, and how language should be how conservatively language should be used, and that this conflict ended with the victory of one side around 100 CE is a tempting argument to make, but I said we need more research and to consider. But the interesting thing again, this also has to be said, Patanjali says it ends at the confluence, and after that is Madhya Desha, is Mlacha Desha. But Manava Dharma Shastra, Manu Smriti, asked the same question a few hundred years later, and it answers it differently. According to Manu Smriti, the land of the Arya is between the Himalayas and the Vindhyas, but it is now from coast to coast. It doesn't end. Why is that? It is tempting to consider again, that is because by then the ideology of Aryavarta has won over the other side of the Mlacha Desha, and it is now right to call that this entire part, coast to coast, is Aryavarta. But as I said, this is all, you need far more. This is just a beginning to think, but I think we need far more evidence before we can arrive at.
These fellows south of India.
If you are saying that, it is clear that as far as Aryavarta was concerned, those people who were not speaking proper language were not proper. They were not part of the Aryavarta.
So South Indians are not part of it.
But you have to also see, this is something that keeps changing. So right, even between Patanjali and so yeah, at some point of time you are right. That would have been so. But I would imagine that has changed over time.
Mr. Kansal. Chandra.
Joseph Pratt,
Yeah.
that around 1900 BCE